Hi, my name is Dr Chatterjee, medical doctor, author of The 4-Pillar Plan and television presenter. I believe that all of us have the ability to feel better than we currently do, but getting healthy has become far too complicated. With this podcast, I aim to simplify it. I'm going to be having conversations with some of the most interesting and exciting people both within as well as outside the health space to hopefully inspire you as well as empower you with simple tips that you can put into practice immediately to transform the way that you feel. I believe that when we are healthier, we are happier because when we feel better, we live more. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome onto the show today a guest who is very well qualified. He's got a BSc in human nutrition. He's got a postgraduate diploma in nutritional medicine, but he's also a chef. It is none other than Dale Pinnock, who goes by the name of the Medicinal Chef. Dale, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Dale, I've been familiar with your work for a number of years now. You've written how many books now? Is it 12, 13?
13 books.
13 books, okay. And I've always been intrigued by your title, which is that of the Medicinal Chef.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could expand as to how you came up with that title and how it's relevant.
Well, it's a deliberately provocative title, really, because I wanted people to think differently about food. I wanted them to think of it not as just a source of fuel, but as something that could actually be a valid part of the healthcare picture. You know, it has the capacity to make us better and to do us harm. And that's how I wanted people to start thinking about the food that they're eating. So I kind of conjured up that title from that point of view. Really.
How old is that title now?
Oh, crikey. That was probably about 2002 I came up with that.
2002, so we're looking at 16 years. So I would also make the case that you were a little bit ahead of your time in many ways because I'm sure having been in this field for quite a long time now, you've seen that there's a burgeoning interest at the moment. You know, there's more and more people talking about food as medicine or lifestyle as medicine. Yet you were out there in 2002 coming up with that title, the Medicinal Chef.
Even before that, even in the 90s, I was kind of into this in the late 90s as well. And back then, it was quite hard to actually find good, healthy food. And if you told people that you were, that you're eating a healthy diet, they'd look at you like you'd just fallen out the sky. It was a very different environment.
Did you ever get any pushback on the title, the Medicinal Chef?
I haven't, no. That's the one thing I've not had any kind of pushback. I mean, you get the odd people kind of bringing Lily the Pink references in now and again, but that's all a bit of fun. I can live with that.
So, I'd love to understand your journey. I mean, when did you start cooking? When did you start seeing, the relationship between cooking, food and health? Was there a defining moment, or is this something you've always been interested in?
There were defining moments. I mean, I've cooked since I was 4 years old. As soon as me and my sister were old enough to know what a saucepan was, my mum would hoik us into the kitchen and get us involved in preparing the family meal. So I've always cooked, always been familiar with it. And then when I left school, I did every job in the catering industry, from pot wash through to head chef and running kitchens. So I've always worked in that kind of environment. But in terms of actually linking it to health, that started when I was about 15 years old. From the age of about 10 or 11, I started getting really bad acne. And it was the year of leaving primary school to go up to secondary school, that time in your life when you start to kind of compare yourself in relation to your peers, and I looked like I'd been shot in the face with a blunderbuss. It was awful, and I had like all the the Dalasins and
all the creams,
tetracycline, and like the oral antibiotics, the topical lotions. So
you'd been to your doctor, you'd taken all those topical creams, taken all the antibiotics.
The only thing I didn't do was Roaccutane. I didn't go that far, just because I knew there was a lot of nasty side effects, and nothing really made that much of a difference. Got to 15 years old, sat around our friend's house one night, feeling sorry for myself, and his mum came up to me and she said, "Look, unless you change what's going on the inside, nothing will change on the outside." And she lent me this book called Fit for Life, like a proper old school thing. You read it now and it's pretty strange, but obviously as a 15-year-old boy I was like, yeah, whatever. But I was so desperate at that time that I went home and I read this thing cover to cover in a couple of days, and that was where that aha moment kind of clicked in, and I realised that we can actively engage in our own healthcare.
So before that moment, let's just rewind back. So as a kid, you and your sister, you're fascinated about cooking, Did that come from you, or did that come from your mum saying, right, I'm going to teach you, you need to learn how to cook?
That was from my mum, definitely, 100%. And I was always a very enthusiastic eater, so to be able to marry the two together and create the things that I enjoyed eating was
I think that's fascinating, particularly as we talk now in society, how one of the things that we've lost is, that basic human skill to be able to cook. And, it's such a common thing that people are talking about. We need to teach our children to cook again. It needs to be a fundamental life skill that they learn. So you had a mother who was very keen to promote that. As you learnt to cook initially, was health part of the equation, or was it just I want to learn how to feed myself?
Yeah, not at all. It was just because I was an enthusiastic eater. I loved good food, and I just wanted to be able to kind of prepare the things that I enjoyed eating. I wasn't health conscious at all until that moment, really. I mean, I'd be like making all sorts of weird burger concoctions, strange curries with God knows what in them. It wasn't a pretty sight often.
So, even at 15. I think back to myself at 15. I'm not sure how health orientated I was at that time, if I'm honest. Yeah. I think I was into working out. I think I used to buy Men's Health when it came out, and I used to look at the workouts and try and do them all that kind of thing. But, as a 15-year-old boy, you said something really key there. Well, a teenager really, that your friend's mother gave you a book that initially you were probably a little bit skeptical about. Because, what's what I eat got to do with my skin, right? But do you remember what it was in that book that you read that you thought, oh, I wonder if I can change my diet to improve my skin?
I'm not sure if I can sort of recall like a specific chapter or whatever. I think it was just the general tone of it. And the general tone of it was that the modern diet is killing us in a million and one different ways. I mean, it's very sensationalist. I read it now. It's not one I go out and recommend now, but it was it was the catalyst.
But it made an impact with you.
Yeah. I think it was just the tone and the way that it was written. It did kind of give me that wake up call. But that paired with the amount of pain that I was feeling, like in terms of self-consciousness, there was that desire for a deep desire for change.
So what did you start to change?
I changed things quite drastically overnight. I went pretty much vegan straight away. I'm not now, but I was vegan for the best part of 20 years on the basis of this, and then moved over to quite a high raw food diet, and then I must have read nearly 1,000 books before I actually decided to go to university and use myself as a guinea pig extensively. I tried macrobiotic diets. I tried the raw food diets. Ayurvedic approaches to things. I just tried everything. I just experimented on myself because I just wanted to experience all of these different things and just look for keys in all of them.
And so, this is a theme that I see quite a lot with people who are in the health space and trying to promote good health. I'd probably include myself in that, is that we've often done a lot of these things ourselves. We've often experimented with a whole variety of different approaches to find out what aspects of them work for us. Yeah. When you were experimenting, what outcome were you looking for? Was it all around your skin, or were you also looking for more energy, more, better control of weight, all these kind of other factors? Or was it really, I don't like my skin, the medications aren't working for it, I want to get it better somehow?
Initially, it was just to improve the quality of my skin, but one of the pleasant surprises that I found when I started to change my diet was that everything changed. I felt differently. I suddenly started to look at things differently. I mean, obviously what I didn't realise then was I was nourishing my brain and my nervous system at a better level. So the way in which you perceive things and the way in which you actually make judgments based on your perceptions, all of that stuff changes when you start to nourish your body better. So everything started to improve. So I guess I was kind of searching for that holy grail, really. And because there was, I was still young, and I was reading about all these different approaches, and me being the kind of person that I am, I'm so inquisitive, I can't just read something. I need to experience it. I need to know it inside out, upside down, back to front, left to right. So I would often use those diets on myself so I could recall my own progress on them and what I found and my own experiences.
I think that's one of the reasons, Dale, you've been so successful and your books have struck a chord with so many different people, is that you have gone and experienced that and you can almost see it from the patient or the client or the the member of the public's perspective on someone who might be searching for better health through their diet. So I think that's really important. Did you see your skin improve when you changed your diet?
Yeah, absolutely. And if
pretty quickly?
Fairly quickly, yeah. I mean, to start with, I stopped looking grey. I mean, that was one of the first things. I stopped looking washed out, and then I just know I'd still get flare-ups and stuff now and again, but the duration of them was less, and the severity of them was much less in comparison to what they used to be. So I did notice some improvements fairly quickly.
You've tried a variety of different diets.
Yeah.
You were probably, I imagine, searching for which is the one that's going to suit me best.
Yeah.
It's going to clear up my skin, and then, maybe more energy or better cognitive function, all these kind of things. You mentioned that you went vegan, and you were vegan for 20 years, yet you're not now.
Yeah.
I think that's something I want to sort of go into, because vegan diets are all the rage at the moment.
Yeah.
They're getting a lot of traction on social media. There's lots of documentaries that have come out about vegan diets, and they're proving to be very popular with certain sections of society.
Yeah.
Having been a vegan for 20 years, you've presumably made the choice not to be anymore.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just elaborate on that. Why did you change? What have you felt since you've stopped being vegan? Yeah, I'd really love to understand that a little bit more.
I guess the starting point is, what is someone's reason for turning vegan in the first place? If your reason for turning vegan in the first place is animal welfare and a certain group of ethical standpoints, then there is no discussion. That's purely an ethical decision, and none of us can really kind of comment on that.
We all respect that, right?
Yeah. But if you're kind of looking at it as being this health utopia that it's often pitched as like being the answer to absolutely everything, do you know what I mean, you'd live forever, then you may end up slightly disappointed. I actually found initially when I was in my 20s particular, I really, really thrived on it. I felt wonderful. I looked wonderful. I had so much energy. My weight was always like an even keel. It suited me very, very well. Then I hit about 30 or 32 and all that changed. I suddenly started ballooning. I was getting really bad inflammatory disorders and all sorts of issues. I remember one time having CRP levels checked, and it was like through the roof. And,
so for those of you listening not familiar with that, CRP is a marker in our blood of inflammation.
Yeah.
It's not that specific. It can be many different conditions, many different things can cause your CRP to be up, but it's just a marker of inflammation.
Yeah, and so many things started to go wrong. And I was like, what on earth is going on? And then for the first time in like the best part of 20 years, I started getting uncontrollable cravings for animal protein. And then I started to shift more towards like a paleo type diet-ish, a lower carbohydrate, higher protein, higher fat sort of diet. And I kind of got back to where I was before. My weight normalized, my energy went through the roof. The first time I had some animal protein after all that time, it's like I went into orbit. It was crazy. And it just seemed the thing that suits me now. And I think we do go through different cycles in our life where our nutritional requirements change as we go through different life stages.
I think that was such a key point, and it's something I write about extensively in my book, The 4-Pillar Plan. I talk about that, our nutritional requirements may change throughout life. A bodybuilder may have different nutritional requirements from a pregnant mother, for example.
100%.
And it sounds that, from what you're saying, that in your 20s, a vegan diet, and I think we've got to clarify what sort of vegan diet it was, because
it was a whole food vegan diet. Very good, yeah.
So really what you would still consider now to be a healthy, whole food diet, because it's very easy to be a junk food vegan.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Crisps and crackers. And chips. Yeah, exactly, which all come under the vegan they all qualify as vegan, yet they wouldn't necessarily be what we all consider to be healthy foods. You were having a healthy whole food vegan diet, and it seemed to suit you and your lifestyle in the context of what you were doing in your 20s. But there came a point when you didn't feel that it was so much, so you started looking for alternatives.
My health was obviously declining, and it was declining quite significantly. And it was that was the key, just making that small change. I mean, obviously when I started kind of using all of these different diets and experimenting with them, I didn't have any formal training in nutrition then.
Right at the start,
this was like right at the start of the journey. And now that I've kind of gone and got that formal training, I can start to fill in the blanks a lot more. And
but interesting, you've got a lot of benefit even without formal training.
Yeah, absolutely. And the important thing is, because the kind of work that you and I do do when we're working with members of the public and we're working with people that often haven't got that kind of background in nutrition. They may have read an article about something, they may have read a book about something and start to do these things based on that. It's our job to be able to guide them in as responsible a way as we can. And I think if I've kind of experienced all of those diets, the ins and the outs, and have that understanding, I'm in a better position to guide them than someone who's never even looked at it, who's just, in some sort of ivory tower wagging a finger.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I would argue that you're in a better position than most, because not only do you have the educational training, you've also got years of practical real life experience. And I think we lose that sometimes. There's such talk now about how we responsibly influence on social media.
Yes.
And of course, I agree with responsible influencing, but at the same time, I think we need to be very careful that, one of the benefits of social media is that, people can have all this accessible free information that's given to them in a way that they possibly couldn't 20 years ago.
Yeah.
If we start to police that, we then end up in a very similar situation to what we used to have, which is you can only get your nutritional information from one source, right? Whether the source was, we can argue about that, at another point, about, what people think of nutritional guidance.
Yeah.
But, maybe the guidance that's put out for the general population doesn't suit an individual.
Yeah.
And so I think I don't mind so much this room where there are different people saying different things. I know it gets confusing for people, but I still think this is better than a situation where social media doesn't exist and we only get one narrative from one particular organisation.
Yes, I agree, 100%.
I think
100%.
And that's where,
Yeah, I do think it's a mixed blessing. I mean, the good thing about it is the fact that it's got so many more people switched on to the fact that our diet is important.
Exactly.
And that what we eat is actually has the capacity to make real significant, meaningful change in our lives. I do sometimes take issue when these things are aesthetically driven. It's like someone's got this lovely long flowing hair and their bikini body and they're sitting there with yoga pants and an avocado and it's like, well, eat this and you can look like me. That ain't going to happen. That's not what it's about. But when there's kind of messaging that's actually inspiring people to make positive change to their lifestyle, that's a fantastic thing. I mean, it is a bit bizarre that nutrition's kind of got weirdly entwined with fashion. That's something that still confuses the life out of me.
Probably never thought it would happen, right?
How the two have met.
What did you train to be a chef? Was it again self-taught?
I didn't train to be a chef. All my formal training has been in nutrition. I just worked every job in the catering industry, from pot wash right through to running kitchens.
I think there's a lot to be said for that, Dale.
Yeah.
I think we have put so much emphasis on formal training that some things like nutrition, which can be intuitive in so many ways, and for years people, or cooking, which has been just handed down through generations.
Cooking's an art.
It's an
art, and I think it's one of those things like you either have a flair for it, or you don't. With nutrition, it's a very academic subject. It's a biochemical pathway is a biochemical pathway, and it's influenced by a certain amount of variables, and you can kind of learn that, and you can kind of learn the nuances around that. But with cooking, sometimes you can teach people everything in the world, and it's just not their thing. But so you have to kind of work with where they're at to try and fit the information and advice with where their capabilities lie. It's like being able to draw or paint. I see it very much as equally as creative as music or drawing or painting. 100%.
Dale, one thing I think you've done so incredibly well is marry up your personal experience with someone who had some health concerns, who improved them through changing their diets, with their own personal experience as a chef. But then also you have gone out and got that nutrition training, and you've sort of blended it all together, which is why I think your books have proved to be so popular. So what I'm interested in is you've written many different books. In some of your recent books, you have been very sort of condition specific. You've spoken about how to eat for type 2 diabetes, how to eat for anxiety and depression, how to eat for heart disease. I really want to delve deep here, because I'd love to understand. We've got some general healthy eating principles, which we can talk about, that are probably applicable to everyone. But then you've also managed to sort of delve into some specific conditions and sort of emphasised what additional things they might need to do or they might wish to try to help improve them. And I wonder if you could just, because there's a bit of a difference there, generally healthy eating advice versus condition-specific advice.
This is where you can go down quite a fascinating rabbit hole. I mean, well,
let's do it.
Fascinating for us too. I mean, sometimes I might glaze over, but it's the thing is, as you rightly said, there's certain things that will be applicable to everyone in terms of general principles for healthy eating. You know, moving over to low glycemic carbohydrates, good quality protein sources. The composition of the meals, the type of fats that you include, and the kind of fats you throw out. All of those kind of things are relevant to everyone, but when you're battling certain health issues, or when you're having to self-manage particularly certain health issues, there are certain dietary nuances that can become relevant to you. So in the heart disease book, for example, there is a real key focus on the management of inflammation. You know, so we're talking about things like omega-3, omega-6 ratios because of, PGE expression. So obviously to sort of backtrack on that, the essential fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6, they're the metabolic building blocks for several different things in the body. One of the main ones being prostaglandins, series 1, series 2 and series 3. Series 1 and 3 being natural anti-inflammatories that our body produces, series 2 being one that switches inflammation on. And the kind of fats that you eat can manipulate which group of prostaglandins get expressed at what rate. And that then has a knock-on effect on the inflammatory response. And really, with cardiovascular disease, when you kind of backtrack the whole pathophysiological process, before you get the foam cells, before you get the fatty streak, before you get any of those kind of arterial lesions, the initial thing is inflammatory damage to the endothelium. So you're kind of heading things off at the pass there.
Yeah, I love this. So let's just sort of go in deep here. But just for people listening, just to be really, really clear, we're talking about heart disease, and we know that at the root cause of heart disease is a condition called chronic inflammation. Now, I know many of you listening to this probably already know this, but I know we're getting new listeners all the time to this podcast, so I think it's really important that I explain inflammation. We've got acute inflammation, which is a good thing, okay? If we cut our leg, for example, and it starts to bleed, our body sends lots of inflammatory chemicals, to the site to help us heal from that insult. For a few days, that area will be inflamed and everything will slowly return back down to normal. When inflammation becomes problematic is when that acute inflammation can become chronic and unresolved. So every day we are insulting our body in such a way that our body thinks it's under attack, and therefore it constantly releases markers of inflammation. So Dale's talking about, inflammation as one of the big root causes of the development of heart disease and how we can manipulate certain things in our diet to switch off inflammation. So Dale, you mentioned fats, you mentioned omega-3, omega-6 fats. I wonder if we could just sort of break it down for people listening. What are those fats? What foods are they found in? And what, can they possibly start doing in their life right now potentially to start, reducing inflammation and therefore reduce their risk potentially of getting chronic inflammatory conditions such as heart disease? Okay,
so the omega-3 fatty acids and the omega-6 fatty acids, these are what are referred to as essential fatty acids, meaning that we need to actually get them from our diet every single day. Our body can't manufacture them. You can almost view them as being like a vitamin-like substance that's derived from certain fats that we find in our foods. The thing that we really need to be aware of, though, is our need for these, in terms of the amount of these different fatty acids, varies drastically. Omega-3 and omega-6, we need both every single day, but our need for omega-6 is very, very tiny. When we, that small amount that we need, it's involved in regulating certain neurological responses, for example, that we know that it's involved in neurotransmitter production. Very, very small, finite amount that we need. And the pathway that kind of deals with it and regulates it and prepares it and breaks it down can be very, very easily saturated. So if we take in more than we need every single day, it can't enter its normal healthy pathway that it's needed for. And it gets shuttled down a different pathway. Now, I'll park that there for a second and go back to omega-3. Omega-3, on the other hand, we need a lot more of because it has such a ubiquitous function in the body. It's involved in regulating the health of the cell membranes, particularly the myelin sheath within the nervous system, the health of the eyes. It's involved in regulating certain aspects of what white blood cells do. And a real key thing is it's the building blocks for these things that regulate inflammation, same as the omega-6 is. And one of the key things we need to focus on is how much of each we take in. So the first thing that I say to people is reduce your omega-6. So one of the main things these fatty acids turn into are these communication compounds called prostaglandins. Okay, prostaglandins will regulate several things like the pain response, but the most prominent thing that they regulate is the inflammatory response. Three main types of prostaglandin: series 1, series 2, series 3. Series 1 and Series 3 actually reduce inflammation in the body. They turn it down, with Series 3 doing it to quite an aggressive extent. A Series 2 prostaglandin, on the other hand, actually switches on and exacerbates the inflammatory response. Different fatty acids are metabolized to form different types of prostaglandin.
So you're saying that different fats that we take in with our mouth will actually influence different biochemical pathways?
Absolutely, 100%.
Incredible.
So the omega-3 fatty acids, omega-3 isn't just one substance, it's a family of fatty acids, but the ones that we need to worry about really are EPA and DHA, but there's also another one called ALA.
So where do we get these omega-3 fats from?
From oily fish. That's one of the best sources, because in oily fish, the EPA and the DHA are already preformed. EPA and DHA can feed directly into those pathways that form the prostaglandins. Now, EPA gets converted over into that very, very aggressively anti-inflammatory Series 3 prostaglandin, and DHA can form the Series 1 prostaglandin. So the real take-home there, omega-3, anti-inflammatory. Now, omega-6, on the other hand, once we've taken in that small window, that tiny amount that we need that's actually involved in neurological health, and that pathway is saturated, any excess that's there gets shuttled down another pathway, turns into something called arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid turns into Series 2 prostaglandins, which switch on and exacerbate inflammation. Now, the type of fats that you're taking in on a day-to-day basis can influence to what degree these responses are taking place, and can influence which one of those pathways is more active than the other. So one of the things that I say to people is tone down the omega-6. If you have things like margarine, vegetable oil, sunflower oil, anything like that in your house, what you need to do right now, walk up to the cupboard where it's stored, take it out, open the bin, drop it in there, and never go near it again. Instead, move over to something like olive oil, or now and again a little bit of coconut oil, but don't go mad with that either. That's a different set of problems. But olive oil, the most dominant fatty acid in there is omega-9. When we were told to move over to these, quote-unquote heart-healthy vegetable oils because they didn't contain the saturated fat, we created far more issues for ourselves, because those oils are predominantly composed of omega-6 fatty acids. And because we've shifted over to those kinds of fats, we're taking in up to 23 times more omega-6 per day than we actually need in the UK. And omega-3, on the other hand, we're not getting anywhere near enough. So step 1 is reduce your intake of the omega-6. Step 2 is up the intake of the omega-3 by adding more oily fish to the diet, and then even looking at omega-3 supplementation as well. When you do that, what you're doing essentially is manipulating those biochemical pathways. You're influencing the expression of prostaglandins. Now, the knock-on effect there is you start to bring chronic inflammatory issues down.
Yeah, and I've seen this in practice. When you start to change the flavour of the diet so it's more anti-inflammatory rather than pro-inflammatory. I've seen all kinds of problems, whether it's blood markers, but certainly people's well-being, even pain levels of people who've got arthritis or some forms of arthritis. Their pain goes down. It's just absolutely incredible. Dale, I'm interested. You were vegan for nearly 20 years. So during that time, you would not have had...
My fatty acids were in a right state. That was one of the other markers that was really, really high. I was about 70% omega-6.
Oh, so you measured this?
Oh, yeah.
Was that on that blood spot, the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio?
Yeah. The one that Professor Gordon Bell at the University of Stirling, they do a lot of the testing with it.
So you did that. You saw your ratio.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And it was quite scary.
So when you changed and started to bring in that sort of more omega-3 rich fats, more fatty fish into your diet compared to 20 years without, I appreciate you would have made other changes as well. So it's very hard to just say, I changed this and then I felt, differently. But do you know, as you made those changes from being a healthy vegan to a healthy, whole food, eating healthy whole foods, but with some healthy animal products in there, what differences did you feel?
Honestly, I felt like 10 years younger. I think that's probably the best way to kind of
in terms of
liken it.
energy?
Yeah, and also my response to exercise changed drastically because I was always a skinny little runt. I couldn't put on any kind of muscle at all whatsoever. It didn't matter what I did. I mean, I was never really strong enough to kind of do a great deal of hard exercise either. But when I moved back over to this kind of diet, I started responding much better to exercise, in terms of like muscle growth and shape, and I was like, oh my God, I've got deltoids. It's like the first time in my life there's a deltoid.
So you felt a difference when you changed your diet. And guys, I just want to add here that this topic can be quite emotional for people. And as Dale said right at the start, if people are making choices for environmental reasons, for ethical reasons, I'm pretty sure Dale's not saying anything about that at all. He's sharing his own personal experience, what he found. And I've got to say, I've seen this a lot with many of my patients, but there are people out there, and Rich Roll is probably someone who comes to mind. He's an ultra endurance athlete in America. He turned his life around when he went vegan, and he seems to be someone who thrives on a vegan diet. And so I just want to say that I don't believe there is one true diet for everyone. Different people seem to respond to different things. And Dale's sharing a personal experience, but I will go into more about what you say in your books to help the wider public. So heart disease, you've talked about, switching off inflammation. Yep. You've talked about omega-3 to omega-6 fats and how we want to reduce maybe how much omega-6 we're taking in, increase the amount of omega-3s, which you would recommend come from fatty fish. Yep. What would you say to vegans or vegetarians who say, I get it, I understand what you're saying, but I just can't do it. I don't want to have it. Supplement.
You can get a supplement that's derived from algae now that is EPA and DHA. So you can still get those fats and you can still do the same thing. Still take the first step with like reducing the omega-6 rich oils. So when the oils that you cook with, just move over to a good quality olive oil because there's not really much omega-6 in there. It's mostly omega-9, oleic acid. And take that supplement. You can do it. You can achieve exactly the same end. Well,
that's a great tip, Dale. What else was the heart disease book focused on?
Another focus was on low glycemic diets. Now, this is another one of these rabbit holes. Low glycemic diet. One of the big problems that we have in the Western world now is that so much of our diet is composed of like beige, refined, starchy carbohydrates. I eat carbohydrates every day. I'm not scared of carbs in the slightest. But the type that we're eating and the amount that we're eating, i.e., the macronutrient composition of our diet, has skewed quite drastically, and that's caused a whole slew of different problems. But the issue with those kind of foods is that they release their energy very, very quickly. They raise our blood sugar very, very fast, and to quite a high degree. Now, if your diet's generally good and you get a big blood sugar spike, the first thing your body does is just release insulin. Insulin binds to an insulin receptor. Glucose transporter opens on your cell. The additional glucose comes in. You use it as energy. Blood sugar goes back down to a normal range. Bob's your uncle, it's dealt with. But if you're continually assaulting your blood sugar and continually carpet bombing it with these kind of refined foods, then quite a lot of things start to break down over time. Now, obviously, that initial response will still take place. You'll still secrete insulin, but increasing amounts of it, and your cells will start to take up this kind of excess glucose. But our cells have got a cutoff point. If we have too much glucose in the cell, it can cause severe oxidative damage. So the cell will close its doors to glucose once it's full. If that happens and our blood sugar is still high, then quite a lot of other things start to go on. One of the first things that happens is that excess gets sent to the liver and gets converted over into something called triacylglycerol, otherwise known as triglycerides, which is a means for your body to store that energy for a rainy day. Now, this is built into our genetics. This is how we were designed to function. You think when we were kind of living on the plains and all the rest of it, we had times of feast or famine. So we had this ability to store energy for later for those times of famine, but we never get into a time of famine in the modern world.
Famine ain't here anymore, is it? Well, certainly for us here in the West.
Certainly, yeah. And we're kind of constantly stimulating the that response to feast. So that excess sugar gets converted into triacylglycerol, otherwise known as triglycerides. Now, with diabetes and stuff, we can sort of talk about that when we come to that. But in the context of cardiovascular health, why does this even matter? Well, several things. Firstly, the high glycemic diet, where you're constantly pushing insulin up, you're stimulating an enzyme in the liver called HMG-CoA reductase, Right, here we go, down the rabbit hole. HMG-CoA reductase is an enzyme, a very, very prominent enzyme in the manufacture of cholesterol. It goes
What's
on.
the enzyme one of the enzymes that statin drugs target?
CoA's reductase inhibitors, aren't they?
Yeah.
They actually sort of knock that out. And it produces something called mevalonate, and you get all these other different steps, the end product being cholesterol. But it's a really decisive enzyme. If this enzyme kicks in, you're going to be manufacturing cholesterol. Insulin spikes stimulate HMG-CoA reductase. So your production of cholesterol goes up. Now, cholesterol isn't in and of itself this harmful substance. There's lots of finite differences.
Lots of nuance there with cholesterol. There really is.
And the thing is, what we're starting to understand is, like, yes, there is this association between high LDL and low HDL being associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, but it's even more complex than that. It's all to do with the particle size. So with LDL, you can get the very, very small, dense LDL particles, or you can get the large, buoyant ones. The large, buoyant ones, they just kind of bob along like sort of globulous clouds and don't really cause any problem to anyone.
They sort of bounce around in the blood vessels without causing damage, but the small, dense ones are like little pellets that start to damage the blood vessel lining and endothelium.
Into the endothelium. So as soon as you get that endothelial damage, that's when you get that whole cascade of events that kick in that eventually leads to an atheroma, to the actual plaque within the vessel wall. So that's one of the things that we know about high glycemic diets, is that it does favour the production of the small, dense LDL particle.
And guys, I just want to clarify for people, you may have heard of LDL. LDL is what we typically call the bad cholesterol. It's a very oversimplified way of looking at cholesterol and looking at LDL cholesterol. If you are currently getting, cholesterol or lipid panels done by your doctor, certainly on the NHS, you will only get total LDL. You won't get a breakdown of how much of it is small, dense, how much of it is fluffy, and potentially, not quite as harmful. Well, not harmful, really. Yeah. And so I appreciate some of the things we're talking about you may not have access to with your doctor. I hope that is going to change at some point in the near future. But I think the point is, what Dale's trying to make is, you can influence this with your diet.
Yes, you can. Okay? You can get in the driver's seat.
And you're saying that if we eat foods that are lower in sugar, but they're not going to spike our sugar as much, so the low glycemic foods, you're saying that can
influence particle size. So that's the first part of it. Then the second part, obviously, using like the LDL and the HDL, cholesterol is just one substance. There's no good or bad cholesterol. Cholesterol is one single substance, but the HDL and the LDL refer to the carriers that the cholesterol is actually bound to. And I use the analogy of bus routes. One bus that takes people from town out to the surrounding villages, and one bus route that picks people up from the surrounding villages and brings them back into town. They're going in two different directions, and the idea always was that when HDL is raised, more cholesterol is taken from the peripheries and taken back to the liver, where it's broken down and recycled. So we know that there is benefit there, that when you've got a higher level of HDL in relation to LDL, the picture's slightly better. Then obviously we've got the particle size and all the rest of it. Before, I spoke about excess glucose being converted into triglycerides. One of the things that happens when triglycerides are raised is HDL goes down, because the ability of HDL to actually bind to cholesterol, to take it back to the liver for recycling, becomes impaired in the presence of raised triglycerides. So HDL expression starts to naturally go down. So you've got a double whammy approach. You've got a diet that's favouring small, dense particle production, and you've got one that is naturally pushing down HDL. So that simple change as well. And also, going back to the omega-3 can reduce triglycerides and raise HDL. So you start to bring these two things together, and you're starting to hit some quite specific metabolic events. You're reducing inflammatory load, you're reducing triglycerides, you're altering particle size. And they're not particularly complex changes to make. That's the beauty of it. It's not a difficult end to achieve.
It really is. And I think the real take home for me is that if you are concerned about your cholesterol numbers, let's say, and a lot of doctors are moving away from the exact numbers, more looking at ratios. So because we can tell a lot more when we look at a ratio of, let's say, your triglycerides to your HDL levels, or we can look at things like your total cholesterol, your LDL, and how all these play, and how all these sort of relate to each other. So instead of looking at those individual levels, we can look at the balance in the body, which is a I think, a little bit more of a holistic way of looking at these things. But Dale's saying that the changes he recommends in his book on cardiovascular health is actually going to improve that lipid profile, improve that cholesterol ratio. I also want to just touch on the thing you said about insulin. And, insulin is a very important hormone. We need insulin. It does a very important job. Well, it does many jobs in the body. One of them is to direct where we store fat and how we store fat. But one thing a lot of people aren't realising is even before the development of heart disease or the development of type 2 diabetes, for many years before that, you can have chronically raised insulin levels. So your body is doing what it needs to do to adapt, and it's just pushing up those insulin levels higher and higher. We know that, that condition, which we call chronic hyperinsulinemia, that in itself has been associated with obesity. It's been associated with levels of VLDL, very low density lipoprotein. That's a particularly harmful form of cholesterol. It helps, that increased insulin will raise your blood pressure because it increases salt and water retention. There are some studies showing an association between between chronically raised insulin and your risk of breast cancer. So, it's really interesting how, just one thing, that diets that you're proposing to people to help them reduce their risk of heart disease, actually, because the human body's connected, it's not going to just be heart disease, is it? It's going to affect other conditions as well.
Absolutely. And the thing is, with the diet that's related to cardiovascular health and the diet that would be relevant for someone with type 2 diabetes, they're very, very similar. And a lot of the pathways that they're influencing are very, very similar, because there tends to be a triad of issues like centralised weight gain, type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, and raised cardiovascular disease risk markers. And it's called metabolic syndrome, and it's like one of these big scourges of the Western world.
It's the same. It's the same root causes, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes it manifests as cardiovascular disease. Sometimes it manifests as type 2 diabetes, and some people it's both.
Yeah.
Some people it will manifest as polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And instead of treating these all as separate diseases, which is often what we're doing in medicine these days, we've got to go upstream a bit more and go, actually, what is going on at the root cause? And for many of them, it's pretty similar, which is what you're alluding to. So, Dale, how does this approach change in your book, let's say, where you're trying to help people beat anxiety and depression? I'm imagining there's a lot of crossover, but there's also going to be a few differences potentially, or a different focus.
There is a different focus. I mean, with things like the cardiovascular health and type 2 diabetes, diet is a massive part of the intervention. With anxiety and depression, things like that, it becomes a slightly more narrow part of the intervention, because obviously there's so many variables that can actually lead to someone having those kinds of issues. External environment, emotional health, all of those things are interlinked because it's a much more complex system in that respect. But diet and nutrition still does have a role to play, because the brain and the nervous system is a physiological system and as such has its own nutritional requirements. But there is a focus around omega-3. One of the things that we know about omega-3 fatty acids is that they can actually maintain the health of neurotransmitter receptors and also proper functioning of neurotransmitter vesicles. So obviously, to backtrack a little bit on that, with the cells in the nervous system, they don't touch. There's a tiny gap in between them, like the synapse, and electrical impulses are converted into chemical impulses, depending on what the actual impulse is and the instruction that it's giving, and that will turn into a chemical messenger that jumps the gap, that chemical messenger being called a neurotransmitter. Those neurotransmitters are stored in small vesicles at the end of our one nerve ending, comes to the edge of the membrane, spits the neurotransmitter out into the synapse, and then the receptor for that neurotransmitter on the neighbouring neuron detects it and then relays that signal.
So it's how brain cells are communicating with each other, and you're saying that your diets can improve that.
Omega-3 can improve receptor function, so the ability for those receptors to actually detect what the neurotransmitter is telling them, but then also making sure that the vesicles that release that neurotransmitter into the synaptic space are actually functioning properly as well. So that's one thing. But also we know that, this is more in longer term neurological health, but that anti-inflammatory effect as well, like sort of long term memory function, for example. There's neuroinflammation has been linked to memory decline, even though that's a slight offshoot. But the point is there's lots of very, very broad roles for omega-3 fatty acids in the nervous system. Also, the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath, it's a specialised fatty coating that lines the neurons.
Your nerves,
but it's presented along the nerve in like little capsules, and there's little gaps in between them where the electrical signal jumps, so it accelerates the movement of the electrical impulse along the length of the neuron. Omega-3 fatty acids are vital for the maintenance of the myelin sheath. So DHA is one of the key components of the myelin sheath, along with arachidonic acid.
Which is one of the reasons people talk about omega-3s being very important for brain health.
For brain health, exactly. But then also just they help to regulate the nodes of Ranvier, which are those little gaps between the myelin. It helps to make sure that they stay healthy as well. So that's just one thing, omega-3.
So it's quite interesting that omega-3s actually are a prominent, they play a prominent role in your in the sort of treatment or the dietary approach you would recommend for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and anxiety and depression.
They are very ubiquitous, and this is the fascinating thing.
Because they're fundamental to the human body, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're such an integral part of our membranes in every single cell. So that's the kind of level it gets down to.
What are some of the other things for anxiety and depression? If someone's listening to this and they, mental health problems are on the rise at the moment, so 100%. There'll be many people listening who are suffering with anxiety or depression. I wonder if we can go into maybe some specific foods that they might want to think about.
So obviously with the omega-3 we've got the oily fish, but the other really important group of nutrients for the health of the nervous system, particularly in anxiety and depression, are the B vitamins. Because the B vitamins are involved in neurotransmitter production. Things like GABA, for example.
So that's a chemical that the brain produces that helps to calm things down. Okay, and you're saying that B vitamins can help with that.
It can increase GABA, as can magnesium. You bring the two things together, a good intake of B vitamins and magnesium.
So what foods?
So whole grains.
Whole grains,
so things like brown rice, pearl barley, lentils and pulses, quinoa as well. There's some reasonable B vitamin hit in those. A lot of the green vegetables are very B vitamin rich. Asparagus, all the leafy greens. Just getting really, this is the beauty of all of this. And even though we can go into all of this kind of detail, we can really backtrack and put this into a very, very simple picture. And this is something we may get onto later. I can almost bring it down to 3 different things.
But what are those things? Let's do it now.
Okay, I remember there was a question you said you were going to ask about one book. If there was one book.
I said that I was going to ask you that, and I am going to ask you that. Well, we can go into it now, because I think you're so far, Dale. You're giving people hints of how much there is in these books and how much knowledge you've got, and how much you're then putting them into real practical recipes. I think that people can use and actually start cooking for their health, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. But you do have so many books, so if people want to, people are interested enough to go, I want to check out this Dale Pinnock guy. I want to look up his books. Where would they start? What would you recommend is the book that they start with?
I think there's one called The Power of 3.
The Power of 3. So tell me about that.
Do you want to know something funny? I mean, especially considering the title of your book. Years ago, I pitched the title, The 3 Pillars, to my publisher.
Did you?
Yes, and they said no. And basically, I with all of these kind of things...
Time and place.
I know. I mean, that's about 5 or 6 years ago now. You can boil it down to 3 main things, because the question I get asked all the time, and I just imagine you do, is... with all of this conflicting information, what is the ideal diet? What's the perfect diet we should eat? And any of us that have got any kind of scruples should turn around and say, we haven't got a clue. We've got absolutely no idea. But what we do know is a lot of the ways in which our modern diet is destroying our health. So if we do the opposite, we're probably hedging our bets. And all of this stuff we've been talking about is relevant to these 3 things. And if you bring these 3 things into practice, you're hedging your bets. It's not going to be any kind of guarantee of being a perfect diet in any way, shape or form, but it's hedging your bets in a wise and informed way. Those 3 things are blood sugar balance, fatty acid balance, and nutrient density. So we've talked about blood sugar balance, the influence that can have on things like triglycerides and different inflammatory responses. Fatty acid balance, we spoke about that earlier on, how that can influence chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is relevant to almost every degenerative disease.
And heart health and brain health, all these things with omega-3s and fatty acid balance,
Exactly. And then the final thing, micronutrient density, the nutrient density. For a lot of people, we're in the ping and ding generation, do you know what I mean, where it's like ready meals and convenience foods. And this isn't trying to, sort of demonise anything or anyone, or telling people they're wrong or daft or doing stupid things, but just trying to get back to more fresh, wholesome food cooked from scratch because of the micronutrient density, so the vitamins and the minerals. I mean, because what we have to realise about micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals and trace elements, those kinds of things, is that they're biochemical facilitators. They either make something happen or they make something that makes something happen. That's what vitamins, minerals and trace elements do. So they either make something happen themselves or they're involved in making something that makes something happen. And we have a specific need for these nutrients. And if those needs don't get met, both short and long-term implications can be really quite severe. You bring those three things together.
I love it.
Think about how broad an effect that can have on people's health. And it's a very, very simple steps to make. So with a blood sugar balance, we just move over to the much lower glycemic, high fibre, whole carbohydrate sources. So swap your white bread for brown, swap your white pasta for brown, swap your white rice for brown. So that's the first thing. The second thing is reduce overall portion size of those starchy carbohydrates. We need them. I'm not telling people to go out and do Atkins at all, but drop the amount to at least half. That's something that anyone can work with, and then make up the bulk of your meals with non-starchy vegetables. Bring some good quality protein in, and you've got a meal then that takes much longer to digest. It drip feeds blood sugar instead of carpet bombs it, so that whole insulin curve isn't there. So that's the first thing. Change the kind of oil that you use to cook with. So bin the nasty refined vegetable oils and just work with olive oil. And then when you're doing really, really high temperature stuff, a little bit of coconut oil now and again is fine. And then make sure that at every meal you've got something fresh. Even if you're just snacking on some fruit between meals, having a good dense side salad.
Is this for the micronutrients?
For the micronutrients.
Yeah, guys, just a key point there. The conversation around food often gets polarised into being about fat versus carbs, which I think is a little bit myopic. But just a terminology check for you guys. Macronutrients are when we're talking about fat, protein and carbohydrates. When we're talking about micronutrients, which Dale is talking about one of his three pillars, as it were, talking about those vitamins and minerals and those trace elements that you get, from that whole fresh food. And I guess it's something we're seeing a lot now, aren't we, Dale? The advent of highly processed food, ready meals, eating on the go quickly. Often these meals and these foods are energy dense, but they're deplete of those micronutrients. So we are, what is it? We're sort of
overfed and undernourished.
Exactly, which is just remarkable. And to think that we've got an obesity crisis. We're taking on, we're storing too much energy. Yet we're missing micronutrients. These we're just not getting enough. So those are great tips there. And actually, it reminds me of, I think, not last September. I think September before that, at the Royal Society of Medicine. It was a Food as Medicine conference, and you were invited there as a speaker. You gave a live cooking demo to the whole audience of doctors, and I think there was a whole variety of healthcare professionals there. And I think it was a wild salmon dish from recollection, actually. But
with a coconut dal,
yeah, you cooked it there, and I thought, I've got to have that. So I managed to find which room you were in and come and say hi. I managed to help myself to those leftovers, which were absolutely fantastic. And is that recipe in one of your books by any chance?
It's a combination of three different recipes.
Yeah, well, it was superb. So I can attest to the quality of that, certainly for the taste buds, the health benefits, but also the taste buds.
All of that's got to come together because
it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, the thing is, you can have the healthiest diet in the world. If it is as boring as anything, if it's, equated to reading the phone book in the rain, then no one's going to stick to it.
So what would you say to those people who say, I get all that about healthy eating, Dale, but you know what? Healthy eating just doesn't taste very good.
Try my food and then you'll never say that again. Honestly, it's the truth, because
I agree with you.
Yeah, I covered it from the point of view as like an absolute foodie and a chef as well, and those two worlds have got to come together. Food is a wonderful celebration of all things good. I love a good meal, some good wine, good conversation. All of that stuff is food for the soul, and we should.
So you can do both.
Yes, we shouldn't neglect that. If you can understand how to bring those two worlds together, so you're nourishing yourself physically, but you're also nourishing yourself like emotionally, and I don't want to get all esoteric, but kind of spiritually as well. All of these things are sharing a meal with a friend that you've not seen for 5 years. It's one of the best things ever.
It's an important part of food, right? And I think we're missing that part of food in terms of how culturally relevant it is, how it's something we do every day, how sharing a meal with friends has so many other benefits. Helps us enjoy the food, probably helps us eat a bit less. But there's just so much around food that we have just we've moved away from.
Eating at our desks all the time. And although you look at a lot of the blue zones, that's one characteristic that they all share, whether it's the Okinawans, whether it's the Koreans, they all share the meal. They all have that heightened sense of community and togetherness.
Yeah, and Dale, one of the recommendations I make in my book, The 4-Pillar Plan, there's a chapter on this, on try and sit around a table at least once a day if you can, in company, to eat a meal. And it's something that was born out of my experience on those BBC documentaries, Doctor in the House, when I would go around these families around the country and I would see so many of them never ate a meal together. And I found that when I made that recommendation, the knock-on effects, yes, in terms of their diet, but also their relationships and how people say, I feel closer to my partner now because we're conversing, we're getting to know things about each other that we used to just sit on our phones and do our emails whilst we were eating, right? It's just incredible how far we've come from maybe just 30, 40 years ago. But Dale, just to sort of finish off, there's a couple of areas I want to touch on. One is that you've got a brand new ITV series coming out soon. I mean, this is this is the second series. You did this last year. Eat, Shop, Save. And I think the concept behind this is incredible, to help families that want to eat healthier but are struggling, whether it's financial reasons, whether someone's a fussy eater, they're sort of pressed for time, the sort of things that people listening to this podcast are struggling with themselves.
Exactly.
So what can people... what are they going to learn if they watch this show? And again, I'll put links in the show notes, drchatterjee.com/Dale. We'll put all these links there. What are people going to learn?
So the beauty of the show is that we're able to really give simple, practical tips. It's got to be the most simple recommendation that can make the biggest amount of difference. And in every single one of those situations, we found solutions. We worked with the families with where they were at. So none of it is kind of superficial that isn't applicable to anyone. We worked with their own unique set of circumstances and showed them how they could work around it. So if you're pressed for time, for example, you can batch cook. If you have like a spare half a day on a Sunday, cook some of your favourite dishes, but in 4, 5, 6, 7 times the amount you normally would, freeze them in individual portions, and then you've stockpiled your own healthy ready meals for the week or for the month.
And they film you doing all this, and they're going to see all that.
So we do all of that. For fussy eaters, we've had some great ones. I mean, on the last series, we had a little girl that wouldn't eat any vegetables. I mean, she was partial to a chicken curry or chicken dippers or things like that. So we started with a chicken curry. It's like, right, okay, this is what we need to do. It was just, she had a barrier towards trying something new.
Yeah.
When she finally did, she was great, but that was her thing. She had this barrier. So we made a curry. But what I did was actually make what was essentially a very, very thick sweet potato soup. So garlic, red onions, sautéed down. Then the sweet potatoes went in, vegetable stock, pureed it up, then added cumin, ground coriander, turmeric, a little bit of garam masala to that, and then cooked the chicken in that. So it looked and tasted a bit like a restaurant korma.
Wow.
A million miles away from like a traditional korma, and I don't want to kind of insult the culinary geniuses that can create those, but it was like a restaurant korma.
Was she surprised?
That she was happy to eat. And she was like, this curry's lovely, didn't it? And halfway through it's like, you're eating sweet potatoes. And she was like, sweet potatoes taste like that? Yeah. It's like, you don't have to have a plate of steamed broccoli. Jazz it up, give it some flavour, bring it to life. For the ones with a lack of skill in the kitchen, or one of my favourites is like when they're just really resistant to any kind of change. They know that they need to actually make improvements because their health is failing, but they're just so resistant to change. And as we kind of touched on earlier, they think that the healthy food is going to be really, really boring. So what we do there is like, right, what's your favourite meal? And if they say pizza, it's like, excellent, let's make one.
Wow.
It's just like, who said you have to give up pizza? I didn't say that. It's like, let's make one. So what we do, we go to the supermarket. I mean, sometimes we take them shopping as well. Go around the supermarket and you get one of the ready-made, ready-to-go bread packet mixes, like a multi-grain bread. Just add water to it, roll it out, and you've got like a nice whole wheat pizza base, make it nice and thin, and maybe put some spinach on there, some red onion, a little bit of goat's cheese, those kinds of things, you're getting the same culinary experience. You're getting to eat the food that you're already enjoying. We're just showing you ways to give it a facelift.
I love it. You're meeting people where they're at as well. You know,
that's what it has to be.
You're not coming in and saying, this is the perfect diet. You know, what you're doing, I get why you're doing it, but we've got to switch you to this. No, you're meeting them where they're at. Going, right, let's make what dish you are currently having a lot healthier and a lot tastier, which is just incredible. It also reminds me of something that Michael Pollan once said. And again, I may be slightly misquoting him, but he said something about you can eat whatever you want as long as you make it. And his point was, if you're going to eat, you know, a cake or ice cream or a pizza, why not make it? Because he, I think, feels that by making it, you start to get that connection to the food. You start to probably put a lot better ingredients in it than if you bought it ready-made.
You can control what's in there.
Exactly. And I've always kind of liked that one, you know, eat what you want as long as you make it yourself. And that's kind of what you say. You want to eat a pizza, fine. Let's make a healthy pizza.
And also just teaching them what, like, the distinctions of what's making it healthier in the first place. Another popular one has been spaghetti bolognese. So it's like, okay, so we're going to use whole wheat spaghetti. We're just going to have slightly less of it, and we're going to bulk out the ragu with 50-50, the mince and red lentils. So we increase the fibre, keeps you feeling fuller for longer, you're not going to snack, lowers blood sugar, yada, yada, yada. We give them all the information.
You know what I'm loving about this is that it's practical, it's real life, because one thing I've realised over the last few years is that, you know, we talk about these perfect diets on social media. We talk about what we'd ideally like everyone to be eating, and I get that, and there's nothing wrong necessarily with promoting that, but I think also, you know, some people really struggle with that. They sort of look at what they're eating and they look at that and they go, that is just so far removed from what I'm eating. They don't feel it's relevant to them. So I think what you're trying to do, and I'm really looking forward to watching this series, particularly now that you've told a little bit about what's coming up, is you know, how do you meet people where they're at, real life people with busy lives, with real problems? How do you then help them sort of move towards a healthier diet? So that's incredible.
Well, from my point of view, that's where the help is needed. Do you know what I mean? We you know, for us, we've been converts for decades. But that's why I work the way that I do, because the only time you'll make meaningful change is when you actually deliver something that people will actually do. You know, the best diet is one that you actually stick to. And there's no point telling, like, you know, a family of 5 that have got £50 to spend between them on food, that they've got to be living on, you know, biodynamic grass-fed unicorn and Himalayan wonga wonga berries from, you know, Kensington High Street. Do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's
got to make sure it's practical for people.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, what have you got in your local area? What shops are available to you? How can we make this go further? What tweaks can we make? But then at the same time, don't just say, do this. Teach them why it matters. And say, right, you see this ingredient, I've just swapped this for this reason, and that's going to help you because. And swap this for that. And that information is the stuff that changes lives.
Yeah, I agree, Dale. You know, I can't resonate with that enough. You know, once you explain to people why you're making those changes, what it's going to do for them, I find they want to make those changes. I genuinely find that patients or, you know, clients or members of the public, they want to feel as good as they can. And once we help them and show them and say, you know, when you eat a food like this is what's happening. This is what happens into your body, to your hormones, to your cells. Like, really? I didn't know that, doctor. You know, I find that's a missing piece of not just telling them what they should be eating, or certainly not telling, recommending or suggesting what they should be eating, also explaining the why. I think that really, really helps. And that sort of is a nice segue there into the final thing I want to talk to you about, Dale, which is this new program that you've launched called Nutrition Coaching Monthly. Can you tell me a little bit about that and why you came up with it?
Well, I was just getting dozens and dozens of emails week in, week out from people that were saying, where can I get good quality information about nutrition? I want to learn more. I don't want to be a nutritionist. I don't want to go off and do a course. I just want to learn more for my own sake, for the sake of my family. It's something I'm really interested in. But, you know, just relying on Google or, you know, magazine articles or whatever, it's limited. And they know that there's mixed quality. They know that, like, some of the stuff is complete nonsense and some of it could be quite good, and it's how do they know whether they're on the right track or not. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about is teaching the subject and talking about the subject. I mean, once I get started, it's quite difficult to get me stopped. And it just kind of dawned on me that with the kind of technology that we've got available to us as well, there's room to actually be able to deliver lectures as if I was standing there like giving lectures to people, but deliver it online. So what we've built is this platform where every month there'll be a different lecture, and we go into detail. You know, there is no mucking about, but it's delivered in a way. It's relevant for the layperson. It's not necessarily geared towards health professionals. It's for everyday people that want to learn more about nutrition.
So people listening to this right now who want to know a bit more about nutrition,
Yes.
they can go and sign up for your course.
Yeah, so it's just on my website, just on dalepinnock.com. You'll see online programs on there, and it's just off of that you can get onto it. And it's delivered like a PowerPoint presentation style with me teaching live. So there's obviously like a live chat feature on there as well. So whilst the teaching is actually being delivered, the students can sort of interact and ask questions, and it's an open classroom. It's like an open classroom, but it's just delivered online. That's the only difference. It's like we've been chatting today. It's delivered in that kind of way where everything is explained from the ground up, from the grassroots, and already the people that are in there vary from, you know, high school students through to, you know, retirees, and they're all enjoying it, and no one said you've scared the life out of me. So it's at the right kind of level, but there is the detail in there. Then once the live session is finished, all of the recording automatically goes into an archive, and that archive grows every single month. So you can you've got like your own teaching library there. You can download all the slides and the transcript for the.
So people have got
session.
this reliable resource
Yes.
to learn more about nutrition and also learn recipes.
There's not recipes. This is just the.
Teaching them about
the subject, about
Fantastic.
the nutrition. Yeah, because you know I've got recipes in other things. It's a way for me to be able to teach the subject in a way that I've always wanted to do, and at a level that people have been crying out for a long time.
So it's come from a need from people contacting
absolutely.
you. That's absolutely incredible. Guys, you know, like everything that we've spoken about today, they're going to be in the show notes. A link to Dale's course. We're going to put a direct link there at drchatterjee.com/Dale. So do check out the show notes after this podcast. You can continue your reading, continue your learning. Dale, that sounds exciting. I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
Dale, just to finish up then, the point of this podcast, or one of the points of this podcast, is to help empower people to be architects of their own health. And I always want to leave people with simple tips that they can apply immediately in their everyday life to help improve the way that they're feeling. So I wonder if you could leave my listeners with maybe 4 tips around anything you want. I'm assuming it's going to be nutrition related.
But don't run the scissors.
4 key tips that people can think about applying in their everyday life immediately.
I think you might be able to guess what a couple of them might be from what we've been talking about. But the first one that I would say, this is always my number one tip for anyone that's wanting to make changes, especially for people that are at the beginning of their journey where they've just made that decision that they want to make change in their life. Change one thing. Okay, if like you just wake up one morning and it's like, right, if you've been living on takeaway pizzas and beer and ready meals, and then you say, like, okay, from tomorrow I'm just going to be a whole food vegan and change everything, the chances of that actually being successful are, you know, 0.3% probably, because we are not wired like that. Some people are. Some people can just change everything overnight and do okay with it. So what I say is set yourself one challenge. And this could be as simple as like, okay, with every meal, I'm going to have a good quality side salad with it. Yeah. Okay, I'm now going to snack on fruit between meals, or I'm not going to have the chocolate bars in my desk drawer anymore.
So something that simple.
One thing. The thing is, once you've repeated that a few times and it becomes the norm, then you set your next one.
Yeah, love it.
Like, so, okay, what's the next change that you can make? Whilst that might seem like slow progress, when you look back over the space of 6 or 12 months, your lifestyle would have changed quite drastically because you've been making slow, consistent progress towards a better picture. Yeah. There's very, very few of us that can suddenly be like, right, that's it, changing everything overnight. You know, a lot of people do it on January the 1st. But
on February the 1st, today still happening.
Yeah. But it's just not practical. When you change one thing and you're just making consistent, slow adjustments to your habits, then you've got a much better chance of actually sticking to those changes.
So change one thing.
Yeah.
And what's the next tip?
The next tip is swap your white for brown. Okay, so with the carbohydrate staples that are in our diet, like bread, pasta, rice, those kind of things, just swap over to the brown varieties over the white because they're not refined. This means they're higher in fibre, so it keeps you feeling fuller for longer. It's good for digestive transit. It's good for feeding the bacterial colony that lives within the gut. Different types of fibre can have some miraculous effects on that.
What would you say to those people listening who say, Dale, look, I appreciate that, but I've actually feel a lot better when I don't have, even brown bread or brown pasta.
Don't have it. That's the thing, and echoing everything that we spoke about. If any of that doesn't work for you, if you don't feel good, I mean, I don't. That's one of the things that I learned when I was vegan and went back and I was putting on lots of weight. I'm quite carbohydrate sensitive. But also, if I've cut carbohydrates out completely, then I'm no use to man or beast. I'm a nightmare to live with, and I can't do anything in the gym or any kind of physical activity.
So these are just some general principles,
so just
right? So people can
finding that balance. Yeah.
Okay.
The number 3 would be ditch your vegetable oils.
Yeah.
Okay. So the things like sunflower oil, vegetable oil, corn oil, soy oil, margarines, those kind of things, throw them in the bin, never buy them again. Just get a little bit of proper butter and use it sensibly. And the oil that you use for cooking, just go over to olive oil because it's not omega-6 dense. It's predominantly omega-9. The omega-9 oleic acid has its own set of benefits as well.
Love it. That's a great tip. And final tip?
Number 4, I would say is, and this echoes what we said about the show as well. Start where you're at and do what you're happy to do. Don't put pressure on yourself or think that this is some kind of extreme expectation or something that you should be doing and you're not really enjoying yourself. It's like when you feel good, when you feel healthy, you're going to absolutely love it. It's just going to get better and better. But the easiest segue into that is to actually start with the things that you're already willing to do. So if your favourite meal is pizza, learn how to make a healthier one. If your favourite meal is chicken and chips, then learn how to make it better. Cook the chicken differently, have sweet potato wedges, throw some greens in there. When you're working with where you're already at, you're still giving yourself that pleasure. Food has to have pleasure attached with it. And we have to be happy doing what we're doing. Otherwise, it's just going to be utter misery. You're going to hate it. You're not going to stick to it. And the chances of there being rebound negative behaviours are very, very, very high.
Dale, look, those tips are fantastic. And I think so many people listening who may have struggled before to make sustainable lifestyle change, I think will really resonate with those. And guys, if that's you, I'd encourage you to try and put some of those into practice immediately. Dale, I know often after the podcast, many people want to interact with me and you online. Where can they find you online?
So the website is just dalepinnock.com. It's Pinnock.
On social media?
Social media. So on Instagram, it's The Medicinal Chef. Twitter is just Dale_Pinnock, but I hardly ever go on there. And Facebook is The Medicinal Chef.
Dale, look, I really appreciate your time. I know you're extremely busy, particularly with the launch of this new course. We're looking forward to the ITV show coming out imminently.
Thank you, yeah.
And I hope you can join me again at some point in the future.
I'd love to. Yeah, thanks for having me.
That concludes today's episode of the Feel Better, Live More podcast. Remember, everything that Dale and I spoke about will be available on the show notes page on my website at drchatterjee.com/Dale. So do take a look when you can so that you can continue your learning experience now that the podcast is over. But just a few things to mention. I'm absolutely committed to making this podcast the very best that it can be. I really appreciate the love and support you give to it on social media. I'm actually running a survey so that I can understand what you all want more of in the future, what you think of the current format, what guests you want to see. I want to know what's resonating, what's not working as well as it might work. If you have 2 minutes in your day and can go to drchatterjee.com/survey, I'd be incredibly grateful. It's just a series of questions that helps me better understand your views of the podcast. drchatterjee.com/survey. Or you can access it via the show notes page, drchatterjee.com/Dale. Guys, just to let you know, I've got a brand new book coming out at the end of the year called The Stress Solution, The 4 Steps to Reset Your Body, Mind, Relationship and Purpose. I announced this publicly last week and absolutely delighted with how many of you have chosen to pre-order the book, so thank you very much for that. Lots of you are still asking me whether my book, The 4 Pillar Plan, is available overseas. It's available in a lot of countries now, including the USA and Canada, with a different title, How to Make Disease Disappear. Remember, links to all of these books are available on the show notes page. And finally, thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do take a screenshot of the page right now and share it on social media. Let Dale know what you're thinking, and we will do our best to get back to you. Thanks for listening today, and I hope you can join me next week when the very next conversation in my podcast comes out.